Okay, we are live. It is June 10th, 2021. Welcome to the weird, the strange, and the uncanny. We're just, we started a little bit early here. We're just going to hang out for 5 or 10 minutes, let people come join us, and then we'll formally introduce everyone and get to the readings. So don't mind us. We were just chit-chatting about topics of great importance to horror writers, such as the weather and yelling our stories. Are you guys big summer people? I know, Emma, you said you weren't a winter person.
No, I'm a fall person, which being in Maine is a good place to be in fall. So yeah, I do like the fall.
Same.
Mm.
Yeah, I thought I was a summer person. So I moved to Los Angeles, and now my favorite times of the year are basically any time except for summer.
Yeah.
Summer overload.
Every other time of the year, it's quite pleasant, but summer is a little hot.
Yeah, it's gotten really hot here.
I miss California in the winters when it's that oppressive New York snow. That's when, why did you ever leave California? But besides that, seasons are nice.
So Daniel, you have a lot of stories out or coming out right now that I've seen.
Yeah, I'm lucky. I had a couple of stories that I sold, which is nice. And the same with you. You've got an awesome run of stories. That I'm really excited to hear what you're going to be reading tonight from one of your new ones, and I'm excited to hear everyone.
Yeah, me too.
So towards that, let's and I have one coming up in a story coming in Jon's publication.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say. Really terrific story.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
I'm really excited to be a part of that project. It's such a great publication.
Thank you.
It looks beautiful.
Do some great work.
And
the newest one, if I'm not mistaken, just came out and is just available this week. Yep. If I'm not mistaken, is that?
Yeah, it just became available today. Mm-hmm.
Oh, cool! Is that Volume 4, Issue 1?
Yeah. So it's the fourth year of Vastarian, and it's we have been doing 3 per year, but we've started doing bigger issues twice a year, and this is no exception. It's a very sizable issue, and has some really great material in it, and is all color, and has some really beautiful artwork throughout, and it is, as always, available in print, free shipping worldwide, and pay what you can for the electronic editions.
That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. I love it. I love the publication. So everyone check out Vastarian and say hello to some people in Lovecraft Easing, and Jason's Weird Reads are saying hello to us. So we'll say hello to them and we'll get started. I'll introduce the event. So this is the summer reading series, The Strange, the Weird, and the Uncanny, and have with us tonight Jon Padgett, Emma J. Gibbon, Joe Kaplan, and Ina Effress. How are you, everyone?
Good.
Good. Doing well.
To be here.
We're all above water, and we're hanging in here. And I'll introduce our first reader, Ina Effress. Ina Effress is a speechwriter, fiction writer, and poet who emigrated from Ukraine to the U.S. as a child. Her writing has been nominated for a Pushcart Prize and has been published or is forthcoming in numerous publications, including Air Light Magazine, edited by LA Times former book editor and critic David L. Ulin, Santa Monica Review, Strange Tales, Tartarus Press at 30. I think that's Strange Tales, Tartarus Press at 30. the Swan River Press collection, Uncertainties 5, and Weird Horror by Shirley Jackson and British Fantasy Award winning publisher Undertow Publications. And she's been reprinted in the Best Horror of the Year, among other places. Ina writes for leaders, lawmakers, and organizations that work to bring equitable outcomes to their communities. Much of her poetry and fiction examines images originating from her experiences as an immigrant. And her website is www.inaeffress.com. Welcome, Ina.
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful intro.
It's great. It's great to have you here. We're on the cusp of summer. Anything on your radar? Are you a big summer reader? Anything that you're looking forward to checking out in your summer reading?
You know, it's funny you should ask, because just today, this arrived in the mail. I just got turned on to the Two Lines Press, which has great translations. And these are all short stories. It's called Elemental. And I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah, it's a bit of a glare. Elemental by Two Lines Press.
Yes, and they're all translated from different countries, different authors in different countries, and it just came today, so I'm looking forward to digging in.
And you're going to be reading tonight from your story, Malady of Laughter, from Uncertainties from Swan River Press. Is there anything you want to, I know you don't want to spoil it, but anything you want to tell us about the creation of that, or by means of introduction to the story?
Well, the first thing I'll do is I'll hold it up because the cover is so beautiful, and I just got it yesterday. So
it's gorgeous.
I wanted to see the cover art, and yeah, they do an amazing job, Swan River Press. And you know, I had written kind of like a series about bad men, and this is one of them.
Wherever would you find the inspiration for that?
Well, you know,
unfortunately it's too prevalent, right?
It's too prevalent, but yeah, I mean, a lot of my main characters are men, and I don't know, I think it's just my way of like trying to carry out my own form of justice.
Wow. Well, I can't wait. You're going to read it in just a second, but it's a powerful story. I can't wait to hear from it. Before you get started, is there a bookstore, an indie bookstore, a local bookstore by you that we can give a shout out to support?
Yeah, there are a couple in LA that there are a few, but the Last Bookstore is legendary. It's a huge bookstore. It's beautiful. It's like a tourist destination. And I love that place. And Diesel Bookstore is a great local small bookshop.
Fantastic. Okay, everyone, here we're going to send it over to Ina Effress reading from Malady of Laughter.
Malady of Laughter. It should have been examination week at the Buzuelu Church of England School for Girls. Instead, the halls were empty, beds hastily abandoned, small articles of clothing strewn about, latrine windows blown open by trade winds. The November mavulli muddied the secondary road leading from the village to the ward. A mysterious laughing fever had swept the school. There had not been enough beds in the sick bay, and the nurse had become mobbed by the sound of hysteria, accompanied by chills, fever, and vomit. The girls, ages 14 to 17, had been sent home to their families. But for the groundskeeper, Theodore was the only remaining staff member on the premises. The dining hall was deserted. He wiped his soiled cup. It seemed unnatural without the long queues and the chattering children. He poured directly from the box labeled Quilambero Sugar Company. Was it a sin to indulge in such sweetness? Surely he would pay for it later. Christ hung crooked above his pillow. He accused himself of idleness, which always led to thoughts, scandalous visions of flesh and beatings, and the couplings of animals in the bush. He tidied his dreary room. A rag doll's torn legs splayed from beneath the new cane chair he'd plucked for personal use. Near it was the black rubber tacky strap for disciplining the pupils. On his bruised knees, he prayed to safeguard his sensitive soul from the sins of barbarians. With all his might, he had toiled to instill Christ's testimony in the tribal hearts of young Wasukuma. He considered himself a philosopher. We must exhume the truth, he'd quiver from in front of the chalkboard, and the students would say it with him. Then all together they would recite in a glum monotone, I will lift mine eyes up to the hills. And then his dainty shoulders would bow around his chest as though the core of him had been punctured, as though he were bracing himself against the shameful offense of their shiny brown legs, too long for their desks, against their rows of erect postures and their collective face of judgment. He washed and dressed for the excursion to town, misbuttoning one of his 3 khaki shirts. When he tucked a hank of faded hair under his brown felt hat, he no longer looked boyish, only woefully thin. It had been 2 years since his arrival by dhow to the shore. Dirt and squalor surrounded him. Every ounce of him went to carrying out his duties to God and the Queen. Of this he was satisfied. That is, until Saida appeared and marred his clarity of purpose. More and more his memory faltered. His recollections flickered like the furtive candle flame he had seen of late floating through the dormitory in the detached black of night. A geographic cure, his superiors had said, and cast him from the Manchester diocese. Then they'd reassigned him to a remote post of the earth, like a checker on the dark corner square, for some immodesty he'd committed, though he could not recall what. The crowing of vagabond cocks greeted him. He hailed the groundskeeper, who drove past in the tatty old Ford and squealed to a stop some yards ahead. To the lake, said Theodore in Swahili, with 2 forceful slaps to the truck's roof. A good day for the market. With a stiff bow of his head, the driver grunted. He looked at Theodore insolently, as if about to speak, but seemed to change his mind. The truck backfired as they accelerated. Under the lemon tree where the school grounds petered out, a striped dog shivered and stretched. As they passed a cluster of stick huts, there was an odor of old excrement. It will be night when I return. I will find my own way. Theodore pressed a coin into the man's hand, and, as an afterthought, 2 more until the old dour mouth relaxed into complacency. It was early still. No sound was discernible. A celestial mist hung over the glass of the lake, gray and vast. The mist festooned the boats, eclipsing all but the mute fishermen inside them. Their ghostly bodies seemed to float, beautiful captives suspended between earth and sky, unable to alight on either. No movement other than the sweep and draw of their arms. An occasional net cast for daga. It was from a blank crescent of sand that Theodore scouted Chen and his helper Nasir, their naked torsos, oars cutting the water like spears. Nasir's shoulder blades flashed. He dipped the base of a jerry can to bail water. When he straightened, the boy was a head taller than the older man, who looked at the boy and tilted his face as one who admires a painting. Chen freed a hand and placed it gently on Nasir's broad shoulder. The boy turned in both directions and, at the sight of Theodore in the distance, shrugged away from Chen's touch. Catching that indiscreet exchange, Theodore's chest seared. It felt as if he was flogging his own body with the rubber tacky, the one he reserved for any prideful girl, her dark, muscular bottom becoming more blemished with each feverish whip, her divine skin velvet as the hide of okapi, streaking with fire until he had beaten the girl's demon back to its hiding place. Why was he tingling now, sweating unspeakably, the treetops pealed with laughter? What kind of bird would emit such a terrible sound? His heart kicked like a thief immured in a pillar of brick. Lakeside, it was already noon. Blades of sun impaled the trees. Activity had erupted. Everyone was there. Peddlers set up their makeshift market by the undulating banks. Wamachinga hawked used clothing, buckets, and medicines laid out on gunny sacks, small tubes of lion's fat for 10,000 shillings. Theodore watched the prepubescent beggar girls simpering up and down, baskets of sweet bananas and treats resting against their narrow hips. That was where he found her, the girl with the curry peas. He summoned her with the wave of a 10-shilling note, green and worn and soft to the touch as a gazelle's underbelly. The sensation excited him, and he caught himself. The girl's shapely feet, small and bare, took several carefree steps. Then she halted. Frozen, she stared at Theodore and shielded herself with the edge of her mother's kanga. The mother stopped shelling peas to see what the trouble was, saw the currency in his impatient fingers. She scolded her daughter and pushed her towards the yellow fever tree and Theodore. There he reclined in shadows freckled with light, while Chen and Nasir gutted perch beside him. The girl smelled heavenly of lime, or was it coriander too? Her name was Nima. She held a forearm across her brow as a visor, armpit opened to the air, revealing downy baby hair. Did Theodore sense a faint throbbing under her cocoa skin? Keeping his eyes steady on his knife, Chen's boy, Nasir, spoke to the girl. He asked after her father. But Nima, her lips creamy as a mollusk whose shell has been ripped open by the brutality of the fisherman's net, said nothing. Helping himself to the thickest bag, Theodore addressed her in Swahili. Have you ever been to school? And in a fatherly tone, wouldn't you like to learn about the Creator? I teach his stories to girls like you. She did not answer, but stood with sullen majesty, holding the basket between her and Theodore, nostrils inflamed. Why don't you speak? Theodore coaxed her. Then, to Nasir, he said airily, have her bring me 4 of those guavas on her mother's mat. Hands pink with fish viscera, Chen looked up. He removed his hat. A frown barely noticeable changed his face. He stared at Theodore, then down to the silver mountain of glassy eyes. Somewhere, wild dogs barked. How was it that a man such as Theodore, a principled man, a man of upbringing, had befriended such a man with a dubious past? Chen had been a railway technician shipped to Dar es Salaam by his government. In his fledgling English, he told Theodore his story. Along with 1,000 of his countrymen, he disembarked, all of them wearing identical gray cotton suits, small blue suitcases balanced on their shoulders. They had been corralled onto the backs of large trucks and into remote areas of Tanzanian interior. There, Chen had blasted tunnels and laid track for the railway, which would stretch across to the Zambian copper belt. The rains had been harsh. Landslides and washouts thwarted their labors. For days and weeks, the young men huddled, penned in like livestock, their uniforms smelling of filth and bodies. Emotions boiled. There was no outlet for the basest of needs. Some trouble with a supervisor. A misunderstanding, Chen had said, and recounted his escape, how he'd boarded a dala, slow and hot and overloaded with cargo. Now, Chen repeated quietly, eyes shielded by his straw hat, he could live out his days selling Nile perch. Nima was back with the fruit. Using the skirt of her dress, she had made a pouch. Her exposed knees dimpled promiscuously. He took more notes from his shirt pocket and rubbed them slowly with his thumb. Presenting the fruit, she dropped the crumpled note still clutched in her hand from the food he'd taken. The money slapped the ground softly and landed by Nasir, his burning kiln eyes aimed at her. Theodore picked up the note, damp with her sweat. Was she hiding money from her mother? Was she keeping a secret coffer somewhere, perhaps sewn into a cloth doll posed innocently against the wall of her family's hut? Selfish child. Wicked, lustful child. Fury seized him. Why don't you want to do your lessons? He asked her as she handed him one green guava at a time. Don't you want to live a life free from sin? Catching the venom in her silence, Theodore became excited again and began to rise from his seat under the fever tree's purple branches, whose bark flaked to reveal the yellow underneath. Go find your mother, Nasir said. His voice was of stinging nettles. Shikanje, Chan's whisper to Nasir was intimate. And then to Theodore he spoke quietly, with cautious restraint, as if he had encountered a leopard draped across the branches, spectral and unpredictable. She's only ill at ease because of their belief in witchcraft. I don't understand. What does that have to do with me? Theodore's agitation climbed. I am a man of faith. Nasir heeded Chen's command. Without speaking, he bitterly tied a sack filled with the day's catch before heading to the road. Theodore knew they'd have to sell the fish before it spoiled. You remember the Kupura, Chen continued, one of those abductions. Theodore set down the triangle of newspaper spreading with grease from his food. He had eaten too quickly, and something hadn't agreed with him. Chen slowed his speech. The girl who disappeared, Saida. The entire village searched for the man who took her. Another unwilling bride, they said. Her father must have sold her in exchange for cows, they said. But not one villager had seen him with their own eyes, the man she was to marry, and the father denies anything of the sort. Theodore kept his gaze on the two beach seiners playing tug-of-war with their net, their strong calves submerged in water. The net hung in the lake like a curtain. Bright plastic buoys lined the rope, bobbing and tipping without a care, as trusting children do. Pants rolled up, the men listed back and forth. They kept the rope taut until the first fistful of squares came into view above the water surface. Holding the corners, the men closed in on one another. They dragged the net towards the shore. Panicked, the fish could escape, neither above or below. The net encircled them. Yes, I do recall something about a disappearance. Nothing out of the ordinary. After that, her father fell ill, Chen continued. You know the rest. Another girl, another student, contracted the strange disease. They named it Devil's Laugh. And then, one by one, the others became infected. The healer, Babu, was brought from Loliondo. He declared it a plague, a witch's curse. Theodore's mind frothed, seethed, hurled itself into a frenzy, a plunging waterfall colliding with its riverbed below. Yes, of course, I know all about the sickness. I sent word to my diocese right away. There has been no response yet. Chen wiped the blood from his knife and peeled a fruit to split in two. And I'm going to stop here in the interest of time. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ina Effress. Great job. We'll move on to our next read. Actually, before we move on, I just want to send a shout out to everyone I see who's joined us. We've got a lot of our friends and supporters here. Just want to say hi to Hyssop and Can and Matt and Farah and Logan and Amelia and Jason, and also we have the Lovecraft Easing here, who they're great supporters of the community and of we writers here. So Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. And while we're doing shout outs, I see John's representing the Outer Dark podcast and symposium with his Outer Dark t-shirt, and Anya and Scott and the Outer Dark are friends of the community and big supporters of us as well. So great to see everyone. And let's move on to our next reader. Emma J. Gibbon is a horror writer, speculative poet, and librarian. Her stories have appeared in various anthologies, including Wicked Weird and Wicked Haunted, and on the Toasted Cake podcast. In 2020, she was nominated twice for the Rising Award for her poems, Fune R.L. from Strange Horizons and Consumption from Eye to the Telescope. Her poetry has also been published in Liminality, Kaleidotrope, and Pedestal magazine. Emma is originally from Yorkshire and now lives in Maine in a spooky little house in the woods with her husband Steve and 3 exceptional animals, Odin, Mothra, and M. Bison, also known as Grimm. Her website is emmajgibbon.com. How are you, Emma?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Since I think it didn't make it into your biography, but if I'm not mistaken, you recently won a literary award from Maine.
I did.
Can you tell us about that one?
Yeah. So every year, the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance present awards for the state of Maine, and Dark Blood Comes from the Feet won the Maine Literary Award, Book Award for speculative fiction. So that's
exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that they're giving out an award for speculative fiction, and I'm even more thrilled to see that it went your way this year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
What's on your radar? Are you a summer reader? Anything on your summer reading pile?
The two that I'm looking forward to, I think, are there's The Shipbuilder of Belfary by Mary Rickett that's coming out from Undertow. I love Mary's writing, so I always pre-order anything that comes out from her. And then I forget the name, but there's a Shirley Jackson tribute anthology edited by Ellen Datlow coming out. So I'll be pre-ordering that one as well.
Oh yeah. I think that's September 21st. Yeah. I forgot the name of it as well. Something to do with dark.
Dark's in the title.
Ellen Datlow's Shirley Jackson anthology with some great people in there. You're going to be reading from Dark Blood Comes from the Feet. You're going to be reading the story Whitechapel. Is there anything you want to tell us about the inspiration for that story without spoiling it for us, or anything you want to mention?
I don't think it'll spoil it. It's a while ago since the first germ of this story came to me, but I was thinking about, I'd heard about people going on death tours. So people who go to different places that are associated with death, stuff like going to Chernobyl and the catacombs in Paris and places like that. And I was thinking about just what different people get out of such places, or why they would go, and people's motivations were going. I'd love to see some of these places. So I'm one of the people who's also got a somewhat morbid fascination about it. But the story came from thinking about that, really.
Yeah, we are. We for better or for worse, we are a culture that is that does have a fascination with it for sure. Mm-hmm. Do you have a local bookstore or local indie bookstore that you can give a shout out to?
Yeah, so one of them is the one that I know you're a supporter of, Green Hand Bookstore in Portland.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Were you going to say that one? So sorry.
No, it's okay. We can.
Yeah. Printer Bookstore, which is also in Portland, and then just over from the river from me in Brunswick is the Gulf of Maine Bookstore.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to you. So everyone, here is Emma Gibbon.
Okay. Whitechapel. The tops of her thighs wobble as she skips down Whitechapel Road. Her skin is so white it gleams as it escapes from under her denim hot pants. I walk behind her to watch. She keeps looking round to check I can see her. Her face is just as pale, a slash of red on the mouth, pearly teeth smiling. She pokes her tongue out at me, pink and slippery, and just suggestive enough to make me groan inwardly. She knows I'll follow her anywhere. She's been attracting looks since we arrived in London, but here it's more noticeable. Whitechapel is predominantly Bangladeshi these days. It's women devout Muslim and covered. Lola looks like a streetwalker in comparison. Bare legs and belly button, her black shirt cut low, and her sooty eyelashes fluttering. Her hennaed hair sways as she skips, and her nails are varnished and chipped. Some of the men openly stare. No one sees me, the tall, skinny boy trailing after her. We met in our first year of college. I'd come from an all-boy prep school, so even a small East Coast college was a shock. I hid behind stone arches, sat at the back of the lecture hall and in the corner of the dining room. The girls were so full of themselves, so strident and confident, I couldn't talk to them. I was hiding behind a tree watching everyone sit on the grass of the quad when there was a voice behind me. Don't they all fucking think they're something? She was like nothing I had ever seen, leaning against the common steps. Her hair was black then, glossy and thick. She wore tight jeans and a figure-hugging shirt. All of the other girls seemed anemic and bland in comparison. She was smoking a cigarette, a kiss of red lipstick around the filter. Every single one of them thinks the world revolves around them, just like their parents told them. It means the rest of us have to suffer listening to them. I looked over at them, all laughing at their in-jokes. She was right. Leave them to it, is what I say. She took a drag of her cigarette and blew the smoke into the air. Why are you hiding behind a tree? She said. I couldn't speak to her, just shrugged. Come on, where does a girl go to get a drink around here? We've been inseparable ever since. Or rather, she did what she always did and I came along too. This trip to Europe was her idea. Everything we do is her idea. She sprawled across my dorm bed in a black dress despite the early summer heat, her head dangling over the end of the bed while I sat on the floor facing her, back against the wall. She had a hangover, bluish smudges under her eyes. We were supposed to be studying for finals. After next year, Toby, we'll be adults, she said. Might as well be dead. Once college is over, we'll have to get actual jobs. I'll end up in some office, my soul dying to pay off my student loans. We both knew I wouldn't be paying off student loans or getting a crappy job. She didn't say as much, but it was all there in the implication. My family had money, old money. They ignored me mostly. I would go on to grad school, probably law, and then pretend to work for the family business. Let's go to Europe, Toby. She rolled over, so her head was facing the right way up. This summer, let's go to see some real death. She propped her chin up with her hands. I could see down her dress. She had no bra on. I nodded. No question who would be paying. Instead of studying, she plotted our route on Google Maps and printed it out. Before she pinned it onto my corkboard, she wrote, Lola and Toby's death tour in black swirly writing, hearts around our names. We started in Pripyat, Ukraine, where Chernobyl exhaled its poison. They tell you not to step on the moss there, as it absorbs the radiation more than anything. There are old women who still live there on the tainted land, eating radioactive cabbage as if nothing happened. We looked at the concrete apartment blocks that nature had reclaimed, trees bursting through empty windows. Lola cooed over abandoned cradles and dolls with sunken faces, chased after the packs of dogs descended from family pets and bred with wolves. It felt like we were the last people on the world. She said it looked just like Fallout. I tried to kiss her under the Ferris wheel, but she laughed and ran away, linking arms with a German tourist we had met at the hotel. At Auschwitz, we looked solemn as we walked through the death camps. Lola's eyes were large and sympathetic as she looked at the tour guide. I wondered whether it was a lie, her sympathy. What was it she really felt under that mask of sorrow? Did she feel for these people that were treated so horribly? I tried to imagine what it was like to be taken to the gas chambers, but all I could think of was the night before when she had let me lie in the bed next to her instead of on the floor like I usually did. She was under the covers and I was on top of them, but I was still there close to her. I thought about her sleeping, her eyes closed, and her breath on my face as we walked through the gas chambers, and I felt guilty. Bad for all those who didn't breathe anymore. This morning we walked around Highgate Cemetery. Lola wanted to see where the Rossettis were buried, but that was in the West Cemetery and we hadn't booked ahead for the tour. We went to the East Cemetery instead. At the gate, a man stopped us and told us that Lola had to cover up her shoulders. I gave her my plaid shirt, but she sulked as we walked through the monuments. She stood in the green shafts of light filtering through the trees among the angels and Celtic crosses, with the warm red of my shirt brushing her cheek and her sullen lips. I'd never seen her look so beautiful. I tried taking a photo of her with my phone, but she refused, still angry with me. I just wanted to capture her, keep her there forever. We looked at Karl Marx's tomb, his huge head on a plinth, but we had no sympathy for the working man. My favourite was the bare-knuckle fighters with his loyal dog standing guard, the chief mourner at his funeral. I told Lola we could learn from that dog, but she scoffed. The only grave she was taken by was the pop art paintings with the word dead in block letters. Only then would she consent to a photograph, but she wouldn't look into the lens. After Poland, we went to see the Sedlec ossuary just outside Prague. Inside, the small chapel is decorated with hundreds of human skeletons. I had vertigo standing under the huge chandelier made of bones. "It's beautiful," Lola said, and squeezed my hand. We stayed in a confection of a hotel with a view of the astronomical clock. We wandered through the Gothic streets of the old town, getting drunk in the cafes and talking about Kafka. We said we'd move here after college, wear heavy coats as we walked across the Charles Bridge. This was the old world, where we belonged, and we would leave the plastic McFried America behind. I'd never been happier. Fuzzy with absinthe, she let me touch her night after night. As she slept, I told her I loved her. We were never a couple, although people assume we were. Lola has consumed most of my life. I never dated or had any real friends. She eschewed female friends and chose her lovers from the town next to the college. Monosyllabic men with dirt under their fingernails, musicians, mechanics, bartenders. None of them lasted long. I waited and hoped. In the romantic city of Paris, she turned cold again. She started talking about college and our final year. "What am I going to do, Toby?" she said. "What am I fucking qualified to do for all my fancy learning? Give blowjobs at the back of a bar? It's what I do best. I could have done that without a college degree." What could I say? "Stop wincing, Toby. You've got nothing to worry about." And then she stopped and smirked. "What's the matter? You upset I never gave you one?" I walked away from her, back to the hotel. She was contrite that night when she came back, the sting of cognac on her lips. The next day we held hands as we explored the Paris catacombs, lingering at the back of the tour group. Now we are in London, our final stop before we return to the States. I'm back on the hotel room floor again, although she doesn't explain why. We visited the tower and the dungeons and Highgate, but here we are in the place where Lola wanted to be most. The morning mood of the cemetery forgotten, she skips and laughs through Whitechapel, the art galleries and mosques giving little clue to the hamlet's previous incarnation. Our first destination is Durrard Street, although it wasn't always called that. These London streets are slippery. They aren't what they say they are, and they used to be something else. I wonder if Lola used to be something else before I knew her. She appeared to me fully formed, but she can't have always been this way. I've never seen a childhood picture, and she never talks about her parents. I'm not even sure if Lola is her real name. Toby isn't even my name. It's a name that Lola gave me. It says Tiberius on my birth certificate, along with a list of fancy family names. Lola didn't want to take the tour this time, so we head out alone. But the sun is then going down, and I think we're safer than we would have been back then, but still, we're a long way away from home. Lola doesn't sense danger. She never has. We find our destination and Lola turns into a back street. There's nothing much to see. Red brick buildings and parked vehicles. The smell of a car exhaust. Lola stops and stares at the sidewalk. "It was here," she said. "The first one. The first canon one." I look at her, but I can't read her face. Mary Ann Nichols. Throat cut, left to right, just like the others. She mimics it by drawing a line across her throat with her finger. Her eyes are glittering. Is this what she came for? All the sights we've seen, all the death? Has any of it satisfied her? Abdomen mutilated, but not as bad as the rest. She stares at the ground. Where next, Lola? I say. She consults her map. Hanbury Street. I follow her. She has a better sense of direction. It's not far. The sun is nearly down. She stops in the road again. Ordinary shop fronts and street lamps. People walking up the road have to swerve to miss her. Annie Chapman, she says. Throat cut from left to right, disemboweled. Her intestines thrown over her shoulders. That he took part of her uterus. I wish she would look at me the way she's looking at the pavement right now. There's a light inside her, showing through her eyes. Her voice is husky, trance-like. 13's Miller's Court. She doesn't skip now. The light has faded. I can see the ghost flesh on the top of her arms. We go under an archway and stand in the cobbled yard. We're alone, and the sky is that deep blue just before dark. If we were inside, the outside would look like night, but our eyes are accustomed to the darkness. Lola points up at a window. Mary Jane Kelly. Last canon. He had a room, but he took his time. Lola, I say. She blinks in the darkness, the light from the windows illuminating her face. She looks tired. He cut off her breasts and thighs. Threw her internal organs around the room. Lola, I say. He mutilated her face. She was unrecognizable. Hey, Lola. She looks at me. He took away her heart. She clutches at her chest. Lola, what do you want? Next is Henrik Street, Elizabeth Stride, then Mitre Square, Catherine Eddowes, and then what? Hotel, home, college. I grab hold of her chin and pull her face close to me. Lola, what do you really want? She looks at me. I want to feel alive. I let go of her face and I looked at her feet. And I know that she's already dying. That just existing in this world will suck the life out of girls like Lola. I realise I can do this. I can give her what she wants. I can save her. This one time, I can satisfy her. I take the straight razor from my pocket, the one I bought from Bond Street this morning while she still slept. I will slash left to right, cannon, and get to work on the rest. I hold the blade above her, try to catch the light with it. My hand shakes as I grip it. Lola, it's time, I say. And I don't believe it myself as I'm saying it. She looks up, and for the first time I can see the little girl she might have been. Her eyes widen in horror. Toby, what the fuck are you doing? She starts to back away, falls on the cobbles and begins to skitter backwards. It's what you want, I say, and I'm crying. I can give you what you want, Lola. She continues to move backwards like a crab, her heels skidding. She's crying too, black lines down her cheeks. I don't want this. I was playing. Toby, please. I drop the razor and sink to the floor, my knees jarring on the large round stones as I crumble. And as I try to breathe, sobbing as the adrenaline ebbs away, she crawls over me and wraps her arms around me, her wet cheek against my head. Let's go home, Toby. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. That was from the book, Dark Blood Comes from the Feet. There it is. Thank you so much. We have a chat feature or in the side scroll. So I think Mike from the Lovecraft E-Zine pointed out the name of the Datlow book is When Things Get Dark. When Things Get Dark. If time permits, which I think it will, if you all want to stick around and if you have a question or two for our authors, you can put a question over in that chat and I'll field them and ask them. We can get a little bit of Q&A if time permits. So we're at the midpoint of the event, and I guess I'll point out the obvious that nobody's cat or dog has come and interfered or showed off already, much to my disappointment. No one has turned into a cat or dog, which that is also much to my disappointment. But I don't want to get anyone's hopes up. I just was wishing that. So I'm going to be the next reader. Instead of reading my bio, I'll just point out we're doing this summer reading series. The next one is going to be July 15th, and that encompasses the book I'll point out for what's on my radar for the summer is Jeffrey Ford's next collection is called Big Dark Hole. I think that's out July 6th, and he'll be one of the readers on July 15th. So that's on my summer radar. Also, an author I'm really been a longtime fan of is Angela Slatter, and she's got at least one new book out, and she'll be one of the readers on in the series on August 13th. So I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to be reading from my latest collection, which is Underworld Dreams from Lethe Press. The story that I'll be reading from is called How to Stay Afloat When Drowning. And I'm fortunate enough that it appeared in Ellen Datlow's Best Horror of the Year, number 12 last year. So the bit that I'm going to be reading from is, it's a long story, but in the story, we just have there's a man who is tasked to helping his sister on a business trip of shark fishing, except his main dilemma is he has made himself a solemn vow, and he has sworn never to leave sight of land. And that is his big problem. And so I'm just going to read a little small bit. This is his memory, his flashback of why he feels that way. So this is How to Stay Afloat When Drowning from Underworld Dreams. The dock where I spent so much time with Nina isn't far from here. Salt air smells the same 10 years on and isn't easily forgotten. I try to conjure the feel of her hand against mine. I'm not sure which memories are real sensations and which are just fabrications dulled by the years. Wind rustling the seagrass brings a sense of vast open stretches of sand back to me. The night bird's honking cry echoes over the water. The ocean breeze has tousled Nina's black bob into a wild tangle, framing her sun-touched face. I can smell her last cigarette, though she swears she's quit. She leans in and rescues our melting ice cream cone with a well-timed lick, followed by a big sloppy smile that transforms her. She ceases to be the depressed soul who thinks and talks so much about art school, but never paints. I no longer see the streetwise girl running away from school, from the city, from what she calls conformity in everything. But instead, she is an ethereal, sensual, carefree being here, watching the waves and afternoon surfers with me. Me, the would-be surfer who's never stepped on a board. With the afternoon sun warming my shoulders through my t-shirt and her sticky hand around mine, I think maybe this is all life is. Pairing up and running away from whatever it is you are running away from, together, like this. The end of the pier is crowded with people fishing, holding hands and wave watching like us. The break isn't so hot, but there are still surfers out there, hoping the left will develop. Someone is in the water yelling. Nina and I push over to the railing to look with everyone else. A young man has hooked a thresher shark on a line. The panicked fish spins and spasms as it is hoisted from the waves. A half dozen people have their hands on the line, helping bring it up. The shark swings and manages to smash itself onto one of the concrete support pylons. The people pull and bring it up all the way to the rail. A woman leans over and gets her arms around it. Someone holds her waist and pulls her in. The crowd grabs hold of the shark, lifts it over the rail, and drops it on the pier. It flops and twists, its open mouth revealing a maw of dangerous teeth, and the steel hook that snared it protruding from its lower jaw. No one wants to go near it now. A widening circle of space forms around it as everyone backs up. The woman who first grabbed it emerges, brandishing a baseball bat. Her blow connects with the shark's side, right under its dorsal fin. It flips, landing on the steel hook, driving it deeper. The woman slams the suffocating thing again. Then the mob is all over it. This isn't fishing. This isn't protecting anybody. Our ice cream splats on a puddle of blood and salt water. The shark is beaten into an unrecognizable shape. I realize Nina has never seen tears in my eyes. In the chaos of kicks and bat swings and skin and scales, it dawns on me we're drowning. We're drowning here. Let's go, Nina says. I'm with you. No, I mean it. I mean, let's really get out of here. Anywhere you want, I say. Anywhere at all. The silver setting reminds me of a wave curling around the small blue opal and two tiny diamond dots. The plan is to ask her to marry me at the lodge at night after we see our first fishing bat. Maybe I'll draw a bat while we're down here, Nina says, all the bouncing on the dreadful road making her voice vibrate funny. The awful bus ride doesn't dampen her spirit, and she kisses me as we lug our bag from the bus stop to the shore. The roaring ocean and clean air are so welcome. We're warned by the two boatmen not to go in while we're waiting for all the passengers. After 10 minutes or so, they decide there are no other passengers. There's water in the bottom of the wooden boat. The older man pushes off the beach and jumps in. The boatman on the motor guns it as we crash through the wave line. The boat catches air and lands with a heavy thunk. The older boatman leisurely bails water with half of a plastic jug. We motor to the estuary at the mouth of the river, which is the only way to the lodge. Swells lift and drop us. I don't like the look of the waves we're going to have to pass through, nor the way the boatmen are bickering in Spanish. It's rough, the younger boatman says to me. We may have to go back and try again tomorrow. But it's almost dark, I say. Where are we going to stay? Don't sleep on the beach, he says. The sandflies are not very nice. The men speak to each other in Spanish. We're going to try? I ask. The boatman guns the engine. I grasp Nina's hand. The water in the bottom has soaked our packs. The older boatman is bailing in earnest now. A big swell lifts and drops us. We spin and wind up with our port side facing land. The boatmen yell at each other as the boat is dragged along, parallel to shore. Waves hit from all sides. The water fills up faster than the old boatman can bail. Can you swim? The boatman asks. What's happening? I ask. Kiss your wife and pray. The older boatman stops bailing and throws a small wooden crate overboard, then a full jug of something, motor fuel maybe, then a bag of oranges he has fished out of the calf-deep water. He grabs my pack and I stop him. We watch the jettisoned stuff spin away in the current. Large, dark shapes are moving beneath the surface. I spot a lone dorsal fin heading towards the crate. Nina is perfectly calm, though she's squeezing my hand as hard as can be. Behind her, a big wave is coming up on us sideways. Her look of resignation inspires a burst of sadness and anger. The boatman guns the engine. The wave slams us. We're soaked, but somehow we don't go under and emerge from the blinding spray shooting towards the shore. The sweet woman who runs the lodge escorts us to our cabin, which is on a secluded rise nestled into tall palms at the edge of the rainforest. Through the big windows taking up most of the far wall, we can see the water that almost dragged us down. There is an assortment of pots and pans, a hairdryer, a small electric radio, towels, a flashlight, and a can of bug spray lined up on the counter next to the sink in the kitchen area. A thick extension cord runs through the front window, bringing power. The shower runs on rainwater. We thank her and flop our bedraggled selves onto the big bed. When the woman leaves, Nina cries softly. We fall asleep in our soggy clothes, the distant sound of waves, no comfort. We wake in the night. The waves have quieted, the tide has receded. A coral reef and fish are visible in the clear water, their tropical colors illuminated by the full moon. The balcony outside the window is bigger than my apartment. A metal tub, a coal grill, and bucket are the only things on it. We peel ourselves out of our clothes, heat up buckets of water, and fill the metal tub. From our bath, we watch the fish in the water below and spot bats flying by, grabbing insects. I rub Nina's shoulders gently and whisper, "We made it." This inspires a fresh round of sobs. "What is it? What's wrong?" I ask. People don't get it. Get what? They don't understand the only thing that's real is how we treat each other. Nothing we do is going to be remembered. Nothing I say comforts her. After an hour, I decide to trek down the cliff to the main area to see if I could find ice cream or anything that might cheer her up. I return to the cabin and notice the big window is open and the power cord is running through to the balcony. Nina stopped sobbing. I don't like the low-pitched buzz coming from outside. Nina? She's motionless in the tub. Her head's tilted back, staring at the sky with that same awful resignation that came over her on the boat. I am confused as at why the cord is still out here until I see the submerged hairdryer. A blue arc jumps from Nina's bruised skin, joining the pink and orange bolts that crackle over the water every second or two. The awful sound is coming from the radio floating by her feet. The reek of ozone and burnt hair hits me, and I understand what she has done was no accident. I told myself a lot of nevers that night. Never leaving sight of land is the one I've kept. I must not have truly meant the rest. I spot the woman from the bar on the bend of the dark road up ahead. I walk faster and try to catch up. And that's the end of the little sequence there. That was How to Stay Afloat When Drowning from Underworld Dreams. So thanks for everyone for sticking with us. We're in the second part of our event tonight. And I'm pleased to introduce our next reader, Jo Kaplan, who writes and teaches in the Los Angeles area with much encouragement from her husband and 2 cats, who we haven't seen on camera yet. Her fiction, sometimes as Joanna Parapinski, has appeared in Fireside Quarterly, Black Static, Nightmare Magazine, Visterion, Haunted Nights, edited by Ellen Datlow. Don't Turn Out the Lights, a tribute to Alvin Schwartz's scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, and the Night Script series. Her most recent novel, It Will Just Be Us, came out in September of 2020. She teaches English and creative writing at Glendale Community College, and her website is jokaplan.com. How are you, Jo?
Good, but that reading you just gave was so intense. I'm reeling, even though I've read the story.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. What's on your summer reading? Anything I guess if that was an intense one, any light summer reading, or do you counter the darkness with more dark readings on your agenda?
Probably more dark reading. I haven't
Same.
even had much of a chance to think about summer reading. I just finished a week of grading after my teaching semester ended, and my summer class starts on Monday. So, but I did just start reading. I did just start reading Imaginary Friend by Stephen Chbosky, and that's like 600 some pages. So I feel like I'll be good for a while with that.
That'll keep you reading. That will cleanse the experience of reading all those student works, which I'm sure there are good ones in there too. So you're going to be reading tonight from the I believe the Miscreations anthology, your short story Matryoshka, or did I get that correctly?
I looked it up. So I'm going to try to pronounce it correctly when I read, but I'm not Russian, so it's just my best.
One of my superpowers, one of my useless X-Men superpowers, is to mispronounce everything, even if I know better. So I hope I didn't mangle it too bad. Yeah, could you tell us something about the story, or what was your inspiration for it, or why it's on your mind lately?
Well, I guess it's on my mind lately because the anthology, and I'll hold it up here, it was nominated for a Braum Stoker Award in the anthology category, so that was really exciting. It didn't win, but Josh Mellerman's story, One Last Transformation, won the short story award. So I guess that's why it's been on my mind, because we just had StokerCon last month. And the story, Matryoshka, I'm going to go with that.
Ina gives a thumbs up.
Is it right? Okay. I do really like as well. They have artwork in the book.
Oh, cool.
So it's pretty cool. I guess, I wrote it specifically for the open call that they had. So I was thinking about creation. And so I guess that really kind of drove, I don't know where I came up with the Russian nesting doll idea, but it just hit me. So not a very interesting answer.
Oh, okay. So the book is has a lot to do with it's a speculative book of creations, or
or miscreate. So what do we create? Creating monsters. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, sounds great. You're also coming from the LA area. Do you have any indie bookstores, LA wise or otherwise, that you want to give a shout out for everyone to?
Yeah, I'll add Dark Delicacies in North Hollywood or Burbank. It's North Hollywood or Burbank. It's one of the two. But it's great because it is specifically a horror-themed bookstore. So it's like a horror reader's dream to just walk in there.
Oh yeah, Del, the proprietor, Del Howison, is such a big supporter of horror writers and horror books everywhere. So great to hear that. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Joe, reading from the Miscreations anthology.
Thank you.
Turn it over to you now.
And just to confuse you, my name is Joe Kaplan on here because that was the name I'm using to publish my books, things. But the story is under the name Joanna Parapinski, so sorry to confuse you. So here's the story. My childhood was filled with dolls, painted, bright shawls, red flowers, lined up on the mantel, smiling with their rosy cheeks. Matryoshka. Ludmila, my mother, collected them. I was never to touch them, even as a girl who liked to mother dolls and small creatures, whose play was in nurturing, thinking if I could nurture, I could be nurtured too. Seeing those dolls staring out at me again in this dingy house so immaculately kept, if not for its irreversible age, cramped in on either side of the minuscule lot, sent me back to my childhood. Their painted eyes and rounded heads, bulbous against the tacky floral wallpaper, ran back the clock till I was 10 again, spiteful, collecting bugs from the yard, opening a nesting doll, peeling back its onion layers, closing a beetle in place of the seed, poisoning one of my mother's precious dolls. Open it, said my mother. The Russian doll felt heavy in my lap, and I was weary. Later, Mama, I appreciate the gift, but I'm tired. I just want to take a hot shower, have a drink, go to bed. All right, she said, giving me her iron gray stare, hard as slate. Even in the deepening grooves in her face did not diminish her. But the daughter I raised would not fall to pieces. She would find a solution. And if she could not find a solution, she would make one. The burning in my eyes, the taste of tears in the back of my throat infuriated me almost as much as the fact that she could still do this to me, could still make me feel like a weak, incompetent child. Maybe I was. My mother had raised me alone, working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, never complaining. But she had too much of the old country in her. Even though Ludmila moved to the US before she could talk, Grandma Inga had instilled in her the virtues of hard women in a hard country. I was too far removed, perhaps, from that experience. Too soft. What solution? I snapped. There's no fixing it. I'm just broken. I choked the words out, hating that my mother was making me go through this again, explained to her my infertility, the revelation of which came after months of trying, and the slow dawning realization that something was wrong. As it turned out, I was wrong. It was me. And after my doctor confirmed it, I couldn't believe Carter's utter lack of resentment. He was almost cloyingly gentle at first, minimizing. I wanted him to slam his fist against the wall or go on a bender, but he only held me and told me it wasn't so bad. There's no solution that will fix this, I told my mother. Carter thought so, and now look at us. The picture of a crumbled marriage. My inconsolable, swollen-eyed grief, the disconnect of his misunderstanding, heated arguments, muttering frustrations into cups of coffee, the black well of despair. And like a kettle set to boiling, it finally shrilled its surrender. I packed my suitcase and came here to my mother's. Carter thought adoption was the answer. Think about it. How many kids are orphans or unwanted? We could help them, Tasha. He had said only hours after we got the news. Only hours, and maybe that hurt more than anything. But how could I tell him? All I had ever wanted was something of my own, a child of my own flesh. I didn't want someone else's child. A terrible, selfish thing, perhaps, and yet. Seeing our impasse, my mother fixed me a hot toddy. When I was your age, my mother gave me a Matryoshka doll. I know, the one above your bed. It is very special to me, she said, nodding to the doll in my lap. Open it. Knowing better than to refuse my mother a third time, I pulled apart the 2 halves to reveal the slightly smaller doll inside, and on until the smallest one came apart in my hand. At its core should have been the seed, the tiny wooden piece carved whole, but it was empty. I threw down the doll in disgust. Its hollowness was inside me, mocking me. How could you? The dolls lined up on the mantel stared. You knew it was empty. My mother reached over and took my hand in hers, wrinkled and knobbed with age. I thought of my own hands growing gnarled, growing old, alone. So fill it, she said. With what? Her smile, as it had ever been, was thin and wooden, did not quite reach her eyes. A piece of yourself. Pressing my lips together, I reassembled the doll with its hollowness inside. How many dolls, plants, insects, clumps of cloth had I poured my love into as a child? I'm not playing. It isn't play. It will help. She stood, took my empty glass. Behind her, the fire crackled. Maybe it is an old wives' tale. She shrugged, the fire dancing behind her. I could not make out her face in shadow. But maybe not. I half expected Carter to call, to check in, but the phone kept quiet. The house was quiet too. My mother didn't like TV. She preferred embroidery, crossword puzzles, polishing her collection of dolls, watering the droopy plants which didn't receive enough sunlight inside, where the few dusty windows were crowned with ugly valances. In the quiet, I could hear faint, restless scratching in the attic, the scrabbling of claws. I looked at my mother, busy with her embroidery. Rats? Still? They don't cause any harm, she said without looking up. Mama, you can't just let rats live in the attic. The scratching sound clawed at my ears, sent knives up my spine. I can't believe you still haven't taken care of it. There had been rats in the attic since I was a kid. It was why I never went up there. At night, I dreamed of dark little creatures scrabbling around, their dull, beady eyes red with the reflection of dim light, burrowing into the wood floor and walls, nesting in cardboard boxes of old clothes. I've always taken care of things around here, she said sharply. Have I not? I thought about offering to help, reminding her that she was not so young anymore, and that so many years of manual labor had aged her beyond her 60 years. Reminding her that I too was capable of taking care of things. Instead, cowed, I said, Yes, Mama. Have you planted your seed yet? Casual, offhand. Clearly she was not as bothered by the scratching above as I was, sharp little claws on my nerve endings. What am I supposed to put inside? Finally, she set down her hoop and linen, looked up at me. I saw she was embroidering a rose embraced by its own prickly stem. What are you willing to sacrifice for your child? I don't know. Then maybe you are not ready, she said, returning to her work. Sacrifice? The word followed me to work the next day, drawing my mind inward on itself, plunging deeper and deeper until I was so ensconced in layers of rumination my colleague had to rouse me from the depths by putting a cup of coffee right in front of my face, drawing me back to the surface. I knew having a child wasn't easy, but I'd always thought of it as gaining something, an addition, not a removal. Did my mother see me as a sacrifice? When I came home, I asked her what I should have asked when she first posed the question. What were you willing to sacrifice? Puttering about the kitchen, she turned, lifted the hem of her house robe, and carefully toed off her left slipper. A calloused foot with yellowing nails emerged, missing its pinky toe, a subtraction that had always stopped her from wearing sandals in public. I don't understand. She dropped her robe and managed to get her slipper back on with her other foot. She had a bad back that prevented her from bending over. You'll have to decide, she said, picking up a wooden spoon and returning to the boiling pot on the stove. Then you can plant your seed. Despite the warm smells of cooking, my stomach turned. I had to leave the kitchen, had to move to keep my own revulsion at bay. I did not understand. I did not want to understand. I found myself in my mother's bedroom, a place I'd hardly been allowed as a child. Even now it felt like a small rebellion to be in here alone. On her headboard sat the old Matryoshka doll she cherished most, polished but faded with age, the eyes nearly rubbed off into white smudges, the rosy cheeks gone gaunt, almost gray. I picked it up, felt the heft of its many hidden layers, and wondered at my mother's secrets. Why couldn't she have just held my hand and told me, yes, this is terrible, this is the worst thing that has happened, and you have every right to grieve? Why couldn't she have told me that Carter was being an imbecile, so let's turn up the radio and have a few extra drinks? Maybe eventually I could even come to accept my barrenness, if only everyone would stop trying to invalidate the feeling that I've plummeted off a cliff. But then, what did I expect from her? None of my grievances growing up had ever been enough to stir her remotest sympathies. A flash of impotent rage sent the doll flying from my hand. Its outer shell shattered against the wall, the inner dolls rolling onto the floor, still intact. Regret soured in my mouth. I picked up the broken pieces. What would my mother say of this childish outburst? I brought the pieces to the kitchen to tell her I would mend it, I would glue it all back together, but as soon as I stepped in the doorway, I dropped the pieces again. My mother lay on the floor. Her arms and legs twisted at the wrong angles. Her skull was cracked, red lines separating her head into 3 pieces. Blood pooled into the grout between tiles. Milky white eyes stared off in different directions, gauzed with death. She was a jumble, a ruined puzzle. I struggled to breathe, stumbled away looking for my phone, my memory a pale void. The pot on the stove boiled over, and I shut off the burner, trying not to taste the tang of blood in the air, the vomit rising in my gullet. Murdered. She must have been murdered. How else could her body lie so irrevocably broken? Thinking this, I blindly grabbed the first solid object my hand touched when I opened a drawer, a meat tenderizer, and clutched it to me as I crept into the hall, my ears ringing. A sudden scratching and my heart pirouetted. Just the rats in the attic. The shifting groan of a footstep. My imagination, surely. The squeak of a door swinging on its rusty hinges, opening like a yawning maw. With a cry, I lunged in the direction of the sound, the meat tenderizer raised high, ready to bring it down on the figure who stood in the doorway of my mother's room, the shadow stepping out into the hall. The figure switched on the light, momentarily blinding me, setting me off track. And when I looked again, I saw it was my mother. My head swam. You, the woman came closer. I recognized the hard slope of her nose and the slash of her crooked eyebrows, the slight droop of her left eyelid. It was her. But her iron gray hair was threaded with chestnut brown. Lines in her face had smoothed like God sweeping his hand over rutted sand. Her hands lacked their grooves and liver spots. It was my mother, but it wasn't. I recoiled. Who are you? Ludmilla smiled, and it did not reach her eyes. You don't know your own mother? She took the meat tenderizer from my hands. What were you going to do with this? Smash me like you smashed my Matryoshka doll? I'm sorry, I said at once, blundering into my own faults and away from the inexplicable sight of my dead mother standing, alive and youthful, before me. I'll fix it. It's too late for that. There was an edge to her voice, sharp as when she'd found the beetle I'd hidden inside one of her dolls, and slapped me, scolded me, sent me to my room without supper. Such harsh words for such a small thing, but nothing was more precious to her than her dolls. Nothing. Is this how I've raised you? Ludmilla said, frowning at me, disapproving, disgusted. You behave this way, a child of my own flesh, destroying what is mine after all I've given you. What have you given me? I shrieked, keeping my eyes open, for if I closed them, I saw her body in the kitchen and wondered which one was her. Go to your room. I'm not a child, I wanted to say, but she looked just like she did when I was a child, so maybe I was wrong. I went to my room and sat on the lumpy twin bed. I listened to her walk down the hall to the kitchen, listened to the scrape of her picking up the broken pieces and dropping them in the trash, bending over effortlessly. Was the body still there? Had I imagined it? Was I losing my mind? As she cleaned, I snuck back into her room and found the doll, bringing it back with me and shutting, locking the door. She cared more about this doll than anything, and all I wanted was to care more about something, some creature that needed me, than anything. And yet she was the mother. I was just a hollow, barren thing, a toy. I opened the next layer of the doll and cracked it under my heel, a splintering sound in the kitchen, like cracking bones. What exactly was she cooking in there? Then, footsteps, but from the wrong direction, from my mother's bedroom. The doorknob rattled. Tasha? It was the voice of a young woman, someone my own age. The door shook. Tasha, you are being a naughty child. Open this door. You're dead, I called through the wood. Do I look dead to you? The knob jiggled again, insistently. I could see the shadows of her feet beneath the door. Open this door and see for yourself how alive I am. You're not my mother. Of course I am, said the voice of the young woman. You are of my own flesh, just as I am of my mother's own flesh. She knew what to sacrifice and planted her seed, just as I did. There's a bit more, but I will leave it there.
Great job, Joe. Thank you so much, and thank everyone, all the readers who've just been doing a great job. And we appreciate seeing all our friends and colleagues and supporters here as well. Before I introduce our next reader, I'll hold up a couple of his wonderful projects. This one is from a friend of ours as well, Nightscape Press did this wonderful Nightscape Press, right?
Mm-hmm,
they did a
right.
wonderful illustrated edition of The Broker of Nightmares, one of Jon's stories. And I had within reach, this is one of the print versions of from Grimscribe, Vestarian. This, I think, is the last one that I'm still making my way through before the new one that just came out today. From Grimscribe Press. So our next reader is Jon Padgett. And let me open up his biography right here to read it to you. Jon Padgett is a professional, though lapsed, ventriloquist who lives in New Orleans with his spouse, their daughter, and a rescue dog and cat. He is the co-editor-in-chief of Vestarian, a source of critical study and creative response to the work of Thomas Ligotti. Padgett's first short story collection, The Secret of Ventriloquism, was named the best fiction book of 2016 by Rue Morgue magazine. He has work out or is forthcoming in Weird Fiction Review, Pseudopod, The Lovecraft E-Zine, Xenobus, and the anthologies A Walk on the Weird Side, Wound of Wounds, Phantasm, Chimera, and For Mortal Things Unsung. His novelette, The Broker of Nightmares, was published in a signed illustrated edition by Nightscape Press, and you could find him on the web at jonpadgett.net. How's everything going, John?
That's great. I mean, this reading's phenomenal. Everybody's been so great. I'm really enjoying just listening.
Yeah, these readings really cheer me up, and just getting to hear just how great everyone is. It really it's always a fantastic night. What's on your radar for the summer? Any summer reads that you've got your eye on?
Well, right now I'm going through a lot of submissions for Vasterian. From every February for Women in Horror Month, we open up and just get some phenomenal work every year. And we are actually open generally for submissions right now in the month of June. So grimscribepress.com, you'll be able to see our submission guidelines if you're interested. I would be remiss if I didn't bring up that we've got a couple of really wonderful collections that have come out just this year. In That Endlessness, Our End by Gemma Files, and Anti-Societies by Michael Sisko, both of which are just phenomenal collections that I highly recommend that you get. And later on this year, We Are Happy, We Are Doomed by Kurt Fawver is coming out, which is another collection from Grimscribe, and it is another just incredible and singular work.
So where's a good, if you can give us two places where readers can connect with those works, where can they get them directly from Grimscribe? And do you have a local or otherwise indie bookstore that you want to call out for us?
Absolutely. You can get any of these books, not the Fawver yet, but later on, probably in the fall, from grimscribepress.com, as well as all of the issues of Vasterian. And anywhere else that books are sold, on Amazon and beyond. In terms of local bookstores, my favorite is one that's only a few blocks away from me on Oak Street in New Orleans. It's called Blue Cypress Books, and it's just a wonderful bookstore. And, it's New Orleans, so there are just an amazing number of fantastic bookstores, but this one's my favorite.
Well, I look forward to I yearn to visit New Orleans again, so I look forward to visiting Blue Cypress. I'm connected with them on social media, but I look forward to seeing them in person someday. You're going to be reading from a new story that is forthcoming in Nightmare magazine, if I'm not mistaken, Flight 389. Yep. Could you tell us something about that story?
Well, it's funny because through Nightscape Press, there is a box set that has been set to come out for quite some time. There have been a number of delays, pandemic and other issues, but one of the things that Matthew M. Bartlett, Bob Wilson, the editor of Nightscape, and I have worked on is kind of creating this really special product. And one of the products is an expanded and revised version of The Secret of Ventriloquism. Originally, I had written this story for that collection. The book has been revised and expanded, but with the Nightmare publication, plans have changed somewhat, and I'm actually working on a new story. So it's kind of going back into Dunstown and Foyle and all of the themes and imaginings from that world. So I'm very excited about that. In terms of the story itself, this is a story that I've wanted to write for a long time. And I love plane travel, but I'm also kind of horrified by it and always have been. It's kind of one of the reasons why I think I like it so much is because it kind of scares me. And so this story kind of delves into a little of that.
All right. So without further ado, let's turn it over to you, and we're going to get to hear Flight 389. Right. Take it away, Jon.
Thank you. Flight 389. This time I will definitely die, Jeffords thinks. He feels that this conscious thought affords him a certain immunity from such a fate, though logically he knows that's nonsense. As always, he chooses a window seat, not the aisle or, worst of all, the middle seat. The window seat is essential for a simple reason. Jeffords must remain in control of the window shade being up or down throughout the flight. At certain times, it must be closed. At certain times, he must open it, even though he dreads doing so, for when he does, he finds himself trapped in one of three familiar nightmares. There is the takeoff nightmare, the interminable waiting at the gate, the frustrating stop-and-go traffic on the tarmac and line as other airliners launch and land themselves. Then there is that initial air raid scream of the jet engines engaging. Jeffords always braces for an explosion from a faulty fuel line or some other mechanical failure at this point. He imagines humongous spinning jet blades sluicing through metal and glass and plastic and fabric and flesh, a cascading conflagration, a roar drowning out all screams. He envisions himself propelled through the cabin, still strapped into his seat, through the cockpit and windshield of the airliner itself. But no, not this time. This time, the brakes disengage as they always have in the past and always will. And Jeffords is pushed back deep into the flimsy seat in which thousands of bodies have been pressed before him. G-force, they call it. He wishes he could close the window shade now, but he can never bring himself to do so. Jeffords must witness the takeoff. His mind begins whizzing with numbers. Often there are vehicles parallel to the runway as there are now, moving at various rates of speed, 30, 40 miles per hour, sometimes interstate speeds or more. For a few seconds, the airplane lags these vehicles. Then the jet is speeding past them, 80, 100 miles per hour. There is a number, Jeffords knows, at which the plane will be able to physically leave the ground. But what is that velocity? What is that moment? And if the moment is lost? If the runway runs out, what then? What would striking chain link do to the airliner? A grass embankment? A concrete barrier? Interstate or water? A building? But no. The plane makes its sudden, steep ascent as always, and here Jeffords must press his face to the window, for statistically he knows that takeoff is the most dangerous part of any flight. Only 100, then hundreds of feet in the air, accelerating quickly, but then the throttle suddenly is pulled back. He envisages himself in an oversized bus that has reached immense velocity and is hurtled off the end of an opening drawbridge into the sky. The airliner's nose is in the air at perhaps 45 degrees or more, but Jeffords feels a sudden floating sensation, followed by a sharp descent, his organs wrenched up. The airliner must be having some mechanical issue. An engine went out? But no, this is only a temporary blip or a bit of minor turbulence. The throttle is fully re-engaged and his organs settle back and down into his seat as the plane resumes its crazy ascent into the sky. Once this immediate danger is past, Jeffords must contend with the airplane meeting the cloud line, unless it is a particularly clear day. He schedules departures only by day, never by night. Turbulence, sometimes heavy, can occur here, after which Jeffords gratefully can shut the window shade again. Then there is the cruising altitude nightmare, in which the plane flies far above the ground, either covered in a layer of whitish gray or dotted with puffy clouds of a variety of maddening shapes, or clear, revealing faded, distant geometrical shapes or flattened blobs of brown or green land or dark blue or green bodies of water. The plane's engines no longer sound like they are tearing themselves apart at this stage. A false equilibrium feels established, a false calm. 10,000 feet is a reasonable height, in which sky and land seem almost equidistant to each other somehow, geometrically balanced. But of course, the airliner doesn't remain at such altitude. It keeps ascending and reaches headier, more awful heights, 20,000 feet, 30,000 feet higher. Finally, the plane no longer climbs or descends, aside from random bumps of turbulence. All is comparatively calm, and Jeffords can almost for a moment believe they are sitting on the tarmac again, still, if not silent. But he knows they are high, yes, impossibly high, higher than any mountain on Earth. The pilot confirms this through the tinny speakers. That voice seems so distorted and distant that it's hard for Jeffords to believe the pilot isn't physically far away, across the country, or even on the other side of the world, which would mean that no one is flying the plane at all. Jeffords swallows once and feels acidic bile coating his already churning stomach. Now that cruising altitude has been established, Jeffords has a choice to make: open the shade and glue himself in sickly fascination to the great heights, the skyscrapers of clouds below, verifying that he and his fellow passengers are indeed strapped inside a fragile metal cylinder, hurtling along at an unthinkable speed, or keep it shut and pretend the plane isn't moving at all, or at least is on solid ground again. This time, Jeffords can't resist opening it. Fully aware of the game he's about to play, putting off examining the deceptively slow-moving tableau outside, he raises the shade and pushes a thick index finger upon the flimsy, transparent plastic. It gives. Jeffords releases and presses upon it repeatedly, and the faux glass rattles in its housing. This inner layer of plastic, he notices, as always, is stained and scratched and smeared. He imagines thousands of filthy fingernails scraping the substance enough to scar it, 1,000 children coating their snotty noses and smushing their lips upon the artificial window glass. Jeffords muses with disgust that his head was also mashed onto the surface only tens of minutes before, during the all-important takeoff nightmare. How often did the airline clean or replace this inner plastic, he wonders? Monthly? Yearly? Less? Not nearly often enough, he guesses. Beyond the clear plastic sits the opaque beige frame in which the outer glass is embedded. At least he thinks it might be glass. It is thick, but for one hole near the bottom of the window, this hole always makes Jeffords uneasy, since it leads to the sky and the wind rushing around the plane at 500 miles per hour. But no, there appears to be something even past this thick, clear shell, though this last barrier seems to his eyes as flimsy as the inner plastic. He knows that last layer must be deadly cold at 35,000 feet. Jeffords stares for minutes at a time at the semicircle of frozen condensation above and beyond the hole in the mid-barrier. There must be a good engineering reason for these holes. An escape route for the dynamic pressure between the air inside the plane and out there in the howling void. Inevitably, he focuses beyond the triple barriers of more or less clear plastic and or glass at the dark blue sky above and the scenery below him. At these times, Jeffords begins by peering as far above the porthole as he can, trying to comfort himself with the infinity of dark blue above. But this only makes him increasingly aware of just how far above the earth he and all his fellows are. Jeffords begins calculating the outside temperature in his head, -20 degrees Fahrenheit, -80. How much oxygen, if any, exists at 35,000 feet? If he was suddenly thrust outside the cabin by a breach in the hull, how long would he last? Would he pass out from horror and oxygen loss, or survive until his body's impact with the ground? His imagination sends him spiraling out of the plane itself, and with his screaming imagined form, Jeffords' eyes are pulled down to the earth. Then all at once vertigo slams into him at the sight of the vast landscape below with its tiny shapes, and he slams the hard, opaque window screen down with a crack that briefly wakes a nearby infant. It cries out once and settles back down. If sleep will come, it will come now. It does not come. After an indeterminate period of dread and hazy anxiety, the airliner finally banks and descends. The landing nightmare. Jeffords opens the shade. The sky's hue has deepened with the coming of dusk. He feels the jet descending and that familiar floating sensation as the throttle is let up. But he briefly turns his face away from the small oval window, bothered as he always is when landing by the shapes growing larger and more substantial below him, white and red and yellow and blue and green and brown, flattening out and spreading, sharpening, becoming less faded, more substantial, more deadly. Jeffords reminds himself that landing is not as dangerous as takeoff statistically, but it feels more dangerous. It seems, in fact, wildly improbable. Jeffords has no idea how such a feat is accomplished, even with the assistance of 100 cockpit gadgets and a room full of air traffic control staff. How can a pilot land an airliner from tens of thousands of feet in the sky, from which even large cities look like a train set as seen from a high rooftop, to a landing field the relative size of a penny? What makes the statistics bear out the safety of such a magic trick? It seems to Jeffords like crazy quantum luck, the equivalent of rolling a handful of dice and coming up with the same sum 1,000,000 times in a row. He thinks this time will surely be the 1 in a million time when the luck, the magic fails. He closes the shade. Jeffords does not care for the sounds airplanes make during landing, the dinging bells, the creaking, the whooshing that should, in the name of decency, especially now in this modern age, be muted or utterly unheard. He does not care for the seemingly random extinguishing of the lights along the ceiling. "We'll be coming in for a landing in the next 10 minutes or so, folks," the tinny, deep voice of what is presumably the pilot says. "Welcome to Foyle, Alabama." With a start, Jeffords wrenches the window shade open again, making a much louder sound than intended. The infant on the other side of the aisle again starts shrieking. This time, it doesn't stop. "Just make sure those seatbelts are buckled, ladies and gentlemen," the pilot voice says after a few moments, and then adds, almost sardonically to Jeffords' ear, We may be in for a little turbulence on our way down. As if on cue, the plane starts quaking, accompanied by a grotesque rattling sound which comes dangerously close to a cracking noise. Again, Jeffords feels his innards jostled up and down and sideways, muted gasps of the passengers during the bigger quakes. Leaning out for the proper viewing angle through his window, Jeffords notes with alarm that the right airliner wing, usually such a solid-looking construct, is starting to flap at its end in subtly bird-like manner, as if the material halfway down the wing and to its tip is made of rubber or, at best, the stuff of fake metal swords. The city of Foyle below is green and basic, what Jeffords can see of it in the dusky sky. A smallish city, only known for its proximity to the Gulf of Mexico, Foyle is a minor hub for a jet airliner this size, which is always on to more interesting, more important locales. Jeffords imagines the air traffic controllers down there in the South Alabama hick town, lazy and incompetent, picking their noses and smoking cigarettes on their control panels, oblivious to Flight 389's approach, possibly absent from the old-fashioned tower altogether. Would the landing magic hold this time without proper technical assistance? Jeffords is sweating heavily now, and the cabin quaking and wing flapping continues at close intervals. That baby's shrieking has jumped a full octave and has increased in volume by at least 50%. Jeffords cringes, looking away from the window for the first time since before they took off. He sees the passengers sitting next to him, a young pregnant woman asleep in the middle seat beside him, and a large male figure, also apparently asleep, in the aisle seat next to her. How could anyone possibly be sleeping during this kind of turbulence? And with that thought, Jeffords turns back to the window, pressing his face against the filthy plastic, and begins calculating again. How many feet up are they now? Surely no more than 2,000, judging by the cityscape below. He starts tracking ant-sized vehicles on the roads, which grow swiftly larger and larger until they resolve into matchbox car size. The tremors continue, worse than ever, and the woman next to him, now awake, is whimpering, possibly praying. Jeffords has read about microbursts. They can form if heavy weather is in the area and have been known to smash even a large airliner into the ground. Is this what they are experiencing? What will it feel like to be slammed into the ground by such violent force? Will he have time to feel anything at all, he wildly thinks? Jeffords' ears pop. He cannot see the airport yet, let alone the landing strip. Other passengers have started making growing sounds of distress, crying, exclamations, groans, a single scream, a burst of nervous laughter. Then, all at once, the turbulence smooths out, and he hears and feels the landing gear engage. He sighs with relief and hears the other passengers sigh and chat with each other. The landing magic has not failed. Not this time. Jeffords looks down at the now hefty-sized buildings and suburban houses only hundreds of feet below, looking for the runway to appear under them within minutes, if not seconds. But then everything goes black outside his window. Not merely dark, jet black. There is a moment of complete, uncanny silence. No airline engine sound, no movement, no feeling of floating or acceleration or deceleration, nothing at all. Jeffords' mind, too, stops mid-thought. There is an intake of air throughout the cabin from all the passengers at once. Jeffords' mouth falls open. The tinny speakers engage again, crackling out static, painfully loud. The pilot's voice speaks over it in a high-pitched falsetto. "Maybe we shouldn't have had that last bottle, ladies and gentlemen, because the co-pilot and I are both feeling a little plastered." The cockpit door slides open with a heavy clang. There's a churning black smoke beyond it. Two figures, dressed in pilot uniforms and clinging to each other, stagger out of the door. Their heads and limbs disconnect from their torsos and fall into a jumbled wreck in the aisle. They appear to be mannequins. There is another moment of complete silence. Then the passengers begin to laugh. They are soon wheezing and croaking hysterically. The men are bouncing as they grip onto each other. The women, one in a pink blazer, the other in a yellow dress, hold their stomachs. Their makeup is all pink splotches and black smears. The children, too, are laughing grotesquely. Even the infant across from Jefford scream laughs, a huge toothless grin on its fat face. Everyone guffaws and weeps. Jeffords begins laughing too, in spite of himself, caught up in the general hysteria. He cackles until his stomach starts cramping, then falls onto the pregnant woman sitting next to him and roars. He pulls her cardigan sweater over his face and hugs her pregnant belly, weeping into it, kicking his legs helplessly. He feels her fetus kicking from within the tight stomach, and his laughter redoubles. When his fit subsides into gasps and sighs, he sits up again. Most of the passengers are still laughing, including the pregnant woman, who is now trying to crawl up the back of her seat in a delirious haze of hilarity, and the distorted static over the tinny speakers has doubled in volume. Jeffords rubs his hand over his raw, wet face in growing disbelief. What has come over them all? Could this be some kind of elaborate, incredibly tasteless airline joke? No. Terrorists? How? Whatever the case, too much time has passed since their final approach. They must surely be on the ground by now, on the ground with fire trucks on their way to put out the engine flames. Yet Jeffords knows intuitively that little time has passed outside the airliner, as if each passenger on Flight 389 has become stuck inside the molasses of a single unfolding moment. He knows something has happened and is continuing to happen in slow motion. Their fates suspended, moving by excruciating degrees just over a city none of them will ever see in objective reality. Jeffords, too, can't see anything beyond the vague, convulsing figures all around him. To his stinging eyes, the figures look all mixed up together, and something strange is happening to the seats and ceiling, and the floors are closing in, and the aisle looks warped. Something to do with visual distortions from all this black smoke? It is everywhere, and it's thickening, and much of the passenger laughter is mixed with racking coughs and squelching noises and gagging. He is also coughing now, then spitting, then straining and vomiting. As he gasps for clean air, Jeffords turns once more to his window, pushing his doughy face onto the flimsy oval of plastic as if he can move through it. And then he is succeeding, pushing his face into and onto the other side of the first scratched and gooey layer, face squeezing into it and into the pocket of clean air and the cool, cool glass material. Then, through that, maybe if he can push his face all the way through that last mysterious layer of plastic or glass, he can finally see something familiar outside, some object or movement that might offer him reassurance, some last hope he could latch a statistical probability upon. But beyond that final window layer, there is only more choking smoke. More bodies entangled with plastic and glass and metal, speaking with a growing, unintelligible roar of static. Jeffords had imagined this moment many times, had envisioned his own death in an aircraft conflagration 1,000 different times, 1,000 different ways. But as he breaks free of the terror, the fire, and a slow eruption of black smoke, he can finally see and hear for the first time in his life, or in the unfolding process of his most lasting death, the dark mechanism behind the window shade, the roaring abyss within the broken city neighborhood the airliner is reshaping into itself. The distorted screams and the laughter and the static and the words that speak beyond and within that static. Finally and forever, he perceives the equilibrium in everything, as if his many-limbed body and mind, the thing that was once Jefford's, and is at once more and so much less, is hovering in the midst of nothingness. Thank you.
Jon, thank you for that reading, and thank you for ensuring I will never fly again. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
That was fantastic. As everyone's readings were fantastic. Let's catch our breath for a second, and if people want to stick around, if anyone has a question to field for some of the authors, I can put it on the screen and read it out. Or if anyone has any of the authors have questions for each other, that will be fine as well. My first question is, Jon, I thought you said you liked flying.
I do, but it's a love-hate relationship. I focused more on the hate, I think.
Okay, we've got one question from a listener. This is a question for all the authors. This is from Matt Henshaw. For all the authors, all of these readings were excellent. When you write your stories, do you ever read them aloud as you are working on them? Are there any phrases from your pieces that you especially like reading? Anyone want to take that one?
Sure.
Yeah.
I often really hear the sentences in my head. I don't know that I like read them aloud, although sometimes I whisper to myself, which might be a little creepy. But I definitely there is that element of wanting to hear how it sounds. So I do feel like I have that in my head. I can't think of any specific phrases, but I really want it to sound good. I feel like the way the prose flows, the way it sounds is really important to me. So I do feel like I hear a lot of it in my head.
I'm getting some echo on. Hopefully this echo isn't too bad. But as part of my creative process, I read it out loud a lot. I force myself to, at least once before submitting a story, read the whole draft. But often as I draft in layers and layers and layers and layers. So I will read things out loud to get it right. Now I do it because I love to do it, but at first when I was just a beginning writer, I was told to do it, told that it would be helpful. So you do catch things that if you find you can't speak it or you can't read it, that's usually a sign that there's something going on with that. And there's also nothing like, I can't explain what it is, but reading into an audience, or even if it's an audience of one, you can just tell when you've engaged with someone and when you're not, and that's useful information as well. Anyone else on that question?
I would. I'm both of you. It strikes me that both of these things, like Joe, I do hear it. That's part of my process, is that I hear it in my head. But I also, it's part of my editing process. Like I read out everything I do. Towards the end stages of the editing, I read it aloud, because that's the way you can really tell where you're stumbling. If you start stumbling when you read it aloud, then usually that means like it needs tweaking. As far as favorite phrases, I'll do the opposite. Like the phrase astronomical clock, I had to slow down to say it because I knew I stumbled over it over and over again. So there's definitely places where I know I stumble and I have to slow down for the phrases.
Yeah, I started reading work that I really loved when I was a kid. I remember reading stories and poetry at a very early age, and I loved hearing it read aloud. So now, much like Emma and Joe, I as I'm writing, I can hear it in my head. I also have a theater background. I started acting when I was about 7, and I kept on doing it up into my 20s on a consistent basis. And of course, now I'm lucky enough to read stories for Cadabra Records and elsewhere. But I've always done that as well. Stories that I especially love. When I was younger, I used to read them onto cassette tape and listen to them on my way to work or school or wherever.
Well, Jon, do you have any tips for us for us authors? Because, like, that reading was fantastic, and I believe every second that you have a background in theater and you are the professional that you are. Were you? I noticed you had great eye contact with the screen. Did you just have the screen? Like, is it just even logistical help? Like, were you reading that from a screen put up in front of you so you could look at the camera and read it? Or how do you have your little studio set up?
I came upon this several years ago. I was asked to a reading, and of course this was far pre-pandemic, and I couldn't come, so I asked if I could record it on video, and I did so. And I was practicing doing it, and I was thinking, I really want to get more eye contact with the camera. So I Googled online teleprompter, and I copied and pasted the story into it. And so now it just scrolls up right at the top of the screen, so that I can at least approximate eye contact, which I've found works really well.
Well, I will be asking you. I won't take up too much of our show's time, but I will be asking you about that at the time. It sounds like it was really effective. Your reading was effective, of course, without that tool, but that tool sounds like a good thing to have in the reader's toolbox there. Ina, did you want to talk about? Did you want to respond to the question of?
Sure. Yeah, I also hear the sentences in my head, and I don't know if I kind of talk to myself in my head a lot. I mean, do other people do that? I don't know. I don't know if I should admit that. But yeah, so I do, like, I hear myself in my head. Maybe not the way other people hear me, but definitely have some kind of voice going on in there.
I think talking to ourselves is just like a thing that probably most writers do.
Yeah, I mean, I argue with people, like, and myself, silently.
I strongly recommend ventriloquistoming. It's great when you want to argue with yourself.
It's the part of the program where the 5 authors reveal their mental illnesses. I mean, their creative processes into the world. We have a question from a reader, Logan England says, could you ask Jon about the trauma? I think he wants to hear about the status of it, but you could mention the book as well, Jon. A book called Trauma and Discovery: Rebellion Against the Conspiracy Against the Human Race by Dr. Raymond Thos. Looks like he's anxious to hear about the status of this forthcoming release.
Okay, so yeah, that's a really good question. The the answer is that it is currently in process. I've been working with the author. That is a pseudonym for those who don't know. And they are well on their way to completing it. Quite a bit of it has already been published in past issues of Asterion, and for those of you who don't know, these are nonfiction pieces by a clinical child psychiatrist who uses the work of Thomas Ligotti in particular, but also other work of the weird in helping his patients. And he has had a very difficult life himself. So this book that is being finished now is going to be published by Grimscribe Press and is really going to be something. I think it's an important book, and it's one that I'm hoping will incorporate short stories as well by a variety of writers that Dr. Thoss has used and mentions in the course of the book.
Wow. So before we go, it's usually my penchant to ask very serious or dark or weighty questions, but inspired by that, by our revealing our mental illnesses live on YouTube, I'm inspired to ask the group, what is the weirdest part of your creative process, or will you share anything? What's something that you wish your readers wouldn't know, or anything weird or funny about the creative process or your writing journey? If anyone wants to start that off. No, like,
I think readers of my work know enough embarrassing things about me.
So mine are, I think mine are a bit too mundane to even. I probably am way weirder than I realize, and so I wouldn't know what was weird about my process. Well, considering the stories I write, I'm a big proponent of going in the shower, idea showers. Like if you need to figure something out about a story, if you need to if you need to like just piece things together or whatever, it just go something about the falling water, and also they talking to yourself in your head and the arguing and stuff like that. It just helps, and it's something about that like makes it blank and helps. And then the other things is just like naps. Like I'll think of it and then I'll go and sleep, and then I'll wake up and then yeah, that's it. I have to like remove myself consciously from the process. Like I have to let the rest of it just do its thing. So quite frighteningly, I don't have a lot of control over it. It's very subconscious, and the more I can remove myself, my conscious self, from the process, the better. I'm really interested to hear that, Emma. I'm the same way. I'm a big proponent with creativity is like getting away from your mind, like showering or doing the dishes or exercising is when the sparks come for me, or the problems unknot themselves. And of course I'm just have Olympic level aspirations with naps. I think that's just I'm just a big fan of napping. It also does help with the creative process as well. But for the reasons like I'm just being a goof and saying I'm a fan of napping, but you're saying the wisdom behind it, whereas it just disconnects you from and lets that subconscious part of us take over, where even those of us who claim to be planners or outliners, at some point
the creativity does come from that subconscious part,
Yeah, I have to do that. I have to get away from the part of myself that is too critical in order to do it. I'm running away from myself all the time. Wasn't it Ray Bradbury said it was like, I think it was Ray Bradbury, it's like trying to make friends with cats. You've got to like give about it. And that struck me as the most true thing I've ever heard about the creative process, that it's like making friends with cats.
You're not going to fool those cats, right? Yeah, and if you can reach that part of yourself where you're past the criticism, you're past the doubt, and you're hitting on something, it's only going to pay off in a story.
I really like everything that you just explained, Emma, because it feels almost paradoxical, because when I'm like, okay, I need to come up with something, I need to write something, I need to push this forward, my instinct is, okay, I got to sit down and do it. But sometimes it's the opposite. You have to actually disengage in order to get it and kind of come back around to it. It's this weird kind of backwards process. So I totally agree with you with that. I guess I think I'm a weird person, but I don't think I'm weird in my like writing process necessarily, except for maybe that something that's maybe kind of weird about me is that I really struggle with first drafts. I love revising. I love when I already have it written and I can come back, and I just love like molding it and crafting it and the entire revision process, which I know some people hate revising. And I have a really hard time getting things down on the page to start. And it's probably because I'm a complete perfectionist. So there's my mental health issue for you there. I'm such a perfectionist that I just struggle with that self-doubt and insecurity of how do I get this down on the page? But once it's there, I love the process of revising. I feel like that is the most fun part for me.
I do too.
Yeah, same here.
Okay. Oh, so it's not weird. All right.
Or we could just be a flock of weirdos together. Who knows? Who knows? Some of my favorite writers are completely on the opposite. They couldn't be further on the other ends of the spectrum on this topic. One of my favorite writers is Kelly Link, and her writing is so fluid and organic. Yet, listening to her speak, she's one of these writers who is a meticulous planner and like an amazing planner, even by planning standards. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I'd heard two of my other favorite authors, Robert Aikman and Tanith Lee, were perhaps the needle pinned on the other end of the spectrum. I've heard stories that Tanith Lee, her method is akin to channeling, that she would almost be like in a trance and she would just claim to hear her stories fully formed, like almost in a channeling way. And Aikman is notorious for not talking about his creative process at all, or incredibly limited. And it is believed that his stories just came from dreams that he had, or the subconscious, which is kind of easy to see. So, hey, there's no right or wrong. There's just an is on this one, We've got another question. Does anyone here use dictation in their writing process? That's from Jason's Weird Reads. Dictation. It's something I've thought about, but I've never done it. Anybody?
Very occasionally. I have, especially, if I'm in the car and, I'm driving and I can't write, because I have time commuting every day. And a lot of times that's when ideas will come. And there have been times that I've, pulled up my phone and started recording my thoughts.
Hey, we've got a guest star on Joe's part of the screen here. Using the Bradbury, using the Bradbury method, making friends with cats and getting first drafts done. So I guess the question I'll just send around to everyone as we're going to wrap it up here. I guess Joe, we'll start with you and your cat. What's next for you? What you got working on? What can we look forward to?
Well, my cat just started meowing over there, so I guess he wanted to add something. So I finished fairly recently a new novel. It's like a historical horror western gothic thing. And so that's been out on sub, so we're still waiting. Hopefully that will end up somewhere and get published in the not too distant future. So waiting on that. And I'm currently working on a new novel that I'm almost halfway through with, which is about an apartment complex in Los Angeles that is haunted by a cult, more or less. So I'm working on those big projects, and otherwise just writing some short stories. I don't think I have anything coming out in the immediate future. Oh, except for I have a story coming out in Hymns of Abomination, the tribute anthology to Matthew M. Bartlett. I think that's coming out next month. I'm really excited about that. It was a super weird story for me to write, try to write, kind of emulate in Matthew Bartlett's world. So that's pretty much what I've got going on at the moment.
Oh, exciting. Good stuff. Let's pass on it over to Ina. What are you working on? What are you promoting? What can we look forward to from you, Ina?
I'm working on a story, and I don't really know how to describe it, but yeah, I'll just probably be working on stories in the foreseeable future. I have another something else out in Airlight magazine right now, and that's it for now. Just going to keep my head down and write as much as I can.
Fantastic. And we look forward to catching up. We've had a bunch of stories that have just come out, and we're looking forward to checking those all out. Emma, what are you working on? What can we look for next from you?
I'm pretty deep in the middle of writing a novel. The pandemic really slowed me down, to be honest. So I'm really getting back up to speed again. It's hard to explain. There's body snatchers and grave digging people, and there's a grave digger in it, and there's also aliens, and there's also some other stuff. I literally write as if I'm driving a car and I can only see what's happening in the headlights, so I can't really tell you what else is going to be in it yet. But I'm deep in the middle of that. I think there's some stories that are near to being published, but I have to be quite vague about it. And I do have some poetry coming out this year. So one of my poems is going to be in the Black Spot Women's Horror Showcase this year.
Great. Poems, short stories, and novels. Yeah. Driving in a car analogy. So exciting stuff. We're looking forward to it. John, what's moving over to you, John? What besides Flight 389, which we may never get off of, what can we look forward to from you?
Well, the box set. Speaking of Matthew M. Bartlett, the box set is called Secret Gateways, and it includes hardcover, fully color illustrated editions of The Secret of Ventriloquism by me, Gateways of Abomination by Matthew M. Bartlett, which is amazing, and a small collection of stories by both of us in collaboration, and that I'm very, very happy about, and it was just a blast to create. Bartlett is such a visionary. I mean, he really is, and I can't wait to read the tribute anthology that Joe's a part of as well. But other than that, I'm really enjoying publishing other writers and artists, and I'm just having a blast with Grimscribe Press. So that takes up a lot of my free time.
Well, we're looking forward to all that, to your work, to your collaborations, and to the excellent work you're doing on Grimscribe Press. So if the four of you, we're going to end the broadcast in just a moment. If the four of you authors will stick around with me after I hit end, we'll just thank you, all you four, for sharing these amazing readings. And thanks for everyone who's joined us. This has been the strange part of the Strange, Weird, and Uncanny reading series. Come back and join us on July 15th for the Weird. We're going to have Jeff Ford, Mike Allen, Gwendolyn Keist, and Laurel Hightower. So things are going to get weird. We're going to keep the horror coming throughout the summer. So thank you so much, and have a great night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank
Thanks, all
you.
of you.